Okay, and we're off. Wonderful. Okay, so we're gonna start with a from a halachic angle. It'll be interesting. So I'm reading from the Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Kuf Lamed. So the Gemara says as follows. But my komiflage, there is a machlokas amarayim concerning a technicality in the laws of inheritance. What the exact law was is not so pertinent to the conversation, but there's a specific the argument going on between the amarayim. So the Gemara says, according to the circumstances, what exactly were they arguing about? Mar savar halacha adifa. One opinion holds that when you're given instruction by the master, by the teacher, so when he says this is the halacha, that's ideal. Umar Savar, the opposing opinion holds Maisa Rav. When you see someone conducting themselves in a certain way, when you see the teacher conducting themselves in a certain way, that's better. Meaning it's better to see the teacher conducting himself in a certain way and then take that as a signal that this is the proper conduct, as opposed to him telling you explicitly this is the halacha. Tana Rabbanan. Ein lemeidin halacha. We do not learn the law, lo mipi limud, not from learning. We'll see what that means in a moment. V'lo mipi maisa, and not from watching someone conduct himself in a certain way. Ad sheyomru lo halacha lama'aseh, until the teacher tells you this is the halacha for action. Shal v'amru lo halacha lamaisa. If you ask and someone says yes, this is the halacha, and take action. This is where the term halacha lamaisa comes from. I'm sure you've heard this term halacha lamaisa. This is the halacha lamaisa. Huh? The stuff that you do, right? So what's the difference between halacha and lamaisa? What's the difference? If something's the halacha, why is it not lamaisa? I thought halacha is the thing that you do. What's the difference? So hopefully we'll clarify these terms. So if the teacher tells you halacha lamaisa, yelech v'yasa maisa, uvilvad shelo yedame, that you should not make comparisons, meaning don't compare the teaching that you received from the teacher to another scenario. Meaning you ask about a certain scenario, don't compare it to another scenario. Don't say, oh, I'm extrapolating because they told me that this is the halacha in this scenario, so that's clearly I can act the same way in a different scenario. You should not do that. So asks the Gemara, that's the whole basis of all Torah study, that we compare one thing to another thing. Like, what are we doing here? It's like on the 100, right? This is on Daf Kuf Lamed. You can ask, we've just done 130 pages of comparing one thing to another thing. So you're telling me that we can't compare things anymore? So Amar Rav Ashi Hachi Kamar. This is what it means to say. Uvilvad shelo yidameh betrefos. That in the area of the laws of trefos, meaning the animal has certain types of lesions or physical, anatomical rather, defects, so that renders the animal not kosher. In that area, you cannot make any comparisons. You can't compare one treifa to another treifa. The Tanya, as it says, Ein omer b'treifos zu doma lezu. In this area, we do not say this is similar to that. The alti tama, and you should not be surprised by this. Sharei chotcha mikan mesa, chotcha mikan v'chaisa. If the animal has a laceration over here, it's fatal. The animal will die, which renders it a treifa. But if it has a laceration a few centimeters to the other area, it's fine. It will live. It will recover. Right? This is like the doctor that says insert the scalpel over here. That'll help the person healing. But if you insert the scalpel there, you've killed the patient. Right? So in things where there's very, very minute differences can make a huge amount of difference, you should not make any comparisons. So what is going on over here? So I'm reading a section from the Rashbam, the commentary on the latter sections of Baba Basra, this grandson of Rashi, who kind of took over because Rashi passed away famously while he was in the middle of writing his commentary on Baba Basra. Right. Yeah. Yes. So we have in the first two chapters, and then a little bit of the third chapter, and then at one point it says Rashi Zkeni Mace. My grandfather Rashi has died. I'm picking up. It's very interesting. Anyway, so he says the following: Umar Savar Ma'asa Rav. This opinion holds that the Maisa is Rav, that seeing the master conduct himself in a certain way is ideal. That's where you should learn the halacha from. Says the Rashbam, when you see a certain action being done, you're allowed to rely on that and conduct yourself in that way as well. However, when the master tells you the halacha is like this opinion, You're in a shir and you say the halacha is like the Beis Yosef and not like the Ramah, or the halacha is like the Magen Avraham and not the Taz. Right? Ein somchen lasos. You cannot take action based on that. Ad sheyomru, until the master tells you halacha l'maaseh. This is the halacha and this is what you should do. Like the Gemara continues to explain. Di amar halacha, because if the master only says this is the halacha, ika lamemar de derech limudo amar hachi, that he's only saying this in the context of his learning. What does that mean? Theoretical. Limud means theoretical. When you're sitting and you're talking about different possible understandings or different conclusions that you can draw based on the information in front of you, that's called limud. It's in the realm of theory. That's what the brisa means. Ein lameidin mi limud. We don't learn from learning. What does that mean? We don't learn from learning. Everything's learned from learning. No, when you're sitting in the Beit Midrash and you're talking in theory, you don't automatically extrapolate that to the world of action. Because there's things that still need to be clarified. Oh, it makes sense. Okay, it makes sense. But there's still more stages that you need to do it to clarify this is actually how you can conduct yourself. However, if there was an actual real-world scenario that came to the hand of the master, have a medaktek yoser. In that case, he would really be scrupulous and make sure that that's in fact the law, and this is in fact the way that a person should act. Like the Gemara will say later, Ein lemein halacha mipi limud. That's what the Gemara says. We don't learn from limud. Limud, again, being the theoretical. When they're sitting in the Beit Midrash talking in theory, we don't learn from that. However, when the master tells you explicitly, act in this manner, shuv ein lefashresh acharav. There's no more concern.
Or if you see him acting in a particular manner.
Oh, so that's also a subtle distinction. It's not enough necessarily to see the master conducting themselves. You have to have both. You have to have the master conducting himself in that way and giving you specific instructions. Both of these ends of the spectrum, let's call them, have the possibility for misinterpretation.
You don't choose
one possible misinterpretation is when you're in the realm of the theoretical and you say, yeah, this seems to be the right conclusion. That's the limud, right? You're talking in theory, you're talking in the ethereal, and you say, yeah, this is the one that makes sense. Based on that, you cannot conduct. You can't take action based on that because it's all in theory.
Huh? At the beginning of Mishnah Hey Dalit,
Halomi Torah Manas Lalamed, not speaking to the Lilmod. Halomi Manas Lasas was speaking to the Lilmod Lasas. Okay.
It's the same concept.
Similar concept. Okay. This is from the fourth parak of Avos that we learned. Right. We learned this last week. Yeah. Very similar idea. I think this is hashing out that idea. What does it mean, learning as opposed to Maisa, right? Theory as opposed to have we refined the opinion enough that it's able to be applied in the real world? So again, that's one possible pitfall, that we're only talking in theory, but there's a gap between the theory and the practice. That's one possible pitfall. But there's another pitfall. The other pitfall is, what's the problem? I saw my teacher acting in this way. Clearly, that's the halacha. Clearly, if he's acting that way, that's what you should do. No, but you don't know what really is going on. You don't know the circumstances. You're misinterpreting the circumstances. You think he's doing this. You think the circumstances are X, but really the circumstances are Y. So even if you see, you can say, what's the problem? He's clear, right? It's clearly okay. But no, it's not clearly okay because you don't know the exact circumstances. So you need to clarify. In order to apply the halacha, you need to clarify that not only is this theoretically sound, but it's also practically sound. And even if you see superficially someone acting in the world in some way, it might not be what you perceive it to be. Right? The students of the Gra produced a sefer called Maisa Rav, based on this term over here that we find in the Gemara. It's a great sefer. All about the specific conducts of the Gra in various areas of halacha. It goes in the order of the Shulchan Aruch. It's very, very good. And yes, they asked him if this was in fact the halacha. They didn't just observe him doing things. They made sure that was in fact the halacha. But the point is that these were collections of the ways that the Gra felt so strongly this was the halacha that he conducted himself in that way, and very often against common practice. The Gemara in Shabbat on Daf Chaf Aleph is actually in much earlier time where we find this idea in the Gemara. Here the Gemara is talking about the halachos of Bameh Madlikin. Right? It's not as relevant today because thank God we have such easy access to types of fuel. No, to fuels, to use for lighting Shabbat candles. But back then it wasn't so easy to access propane or olive oil. Sometimes you had to make do with what you have. So Chazal made various gezeros about what is allowed to be used and not. Why? Because if you have a lighting material that doesn't light smoothly, okay, the possibility that you're going to go and move it around to make sure that the light will continue to light smoothly is extremely high. You find this when you're cooking a barbecue. In order to keep it going, you have to fan the coals. If you don't keep it moving, it's not going to go. So, right, it's not like today we have like the wax candles or olive oil candles. You could just set and forget. Or a switch, right? Something you could just set and forget, right? So most of the things that people use weren't like that. So Chazal made various gezeros about what can be used and what can't be used. Again, not particularly relevant today, but these are in fact the gezeros. And there is a machlokas amaroyim. What happens if you take a material that you're not allowed to use? That Chazal forbade using for Hanukkah for Shabbat candles, and you ensconce it within a material that you are allowed to use. So, like you wrap the flax, for example, in olive oil or something like that. So on the one end, it's a material that can't be used, but you're putting a more flammable, more smooth material in it, which is going to make the light function better.
Are you trying to find something there?
What?
Would you try to find something there? Like,
what do you mean find something?
If you do this, I guess it's a valid question.
No, the question is, what is this? Is this under the prohibition of Chazal? So, if you want to phrase it slightly differently, is such a thing enough of a concern that the person is going to be playing around with the light or not on Shabbat? You could possibly phrase it like that way. But why am I bringing this? Because the brisa that they bring as a proof to this discussion, it kind of mirrors these two points. Karach davar shemadlikin is the brisa that the Gemara brings to support one opinion. Karach davar shemadlikin bo. If you take something that you are allowed to light with, and you wrap it around davar she'ein madlikin bo, something that is forbidden to light with. Ein madlikin bo. That's the halacha. You're not allowed to light with it. The whole thing has to be made of material that you're allowed to light with. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, "Shel beis Abba, I saw in my father's house, hayu korchen petila. They would take a wick, the korchen al gabe egos, and they would wrap it around a nutshell in order to keep it floating in the oil. Because if you just take a wick and put it into oil, it's going to sink to the bottom. So they would take the shell of a nut and keep it there so it would be floating. Now, the shell of a nut is not flammable, and it could mess around with the flow of the oil. So using an egg." That type of material is it's not allowed. But because there's a patila, because there's a wick there, so it's okay. It'll make sure that the wick goes smoothly. So this is being brought as a proof to the conversation. So says the Gemara, "My lav lahadlik." No, excuse me, I skipped. I apologize. So right, so says the Gemara, you're bringing me a proof from the beginning. You're bringing me a proof from Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. He's the minority opinion. The first opinion says that it's forbidden. So why are you bringing me a proof from Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel? He's the minority opinion. So says the Gemara, no, Maisarav. He's not just giving his opinion. He's saying, this is what I saw in my father's house. Now, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel's father is Rabbi Gamliel, the Nasi. He was the head of the Sanhedrin. But he's not just some guy he's bringing a proof from. He says, this is right. I saw in the house of the Prince of Israel, this is what they used to do.
And in this aspect, you can listen to the.
So Maisarav, right? Because in this case, it was clear what they were doing. Why? Because it was Erev Shabbat, and they took a wick and they tied it around a nutshell and they put it into oil. And it's clearly expressing the opinion that this is the halacha. This is the halacha, and a person can conduct himself on the basis of that. It's not like Trefos, where you see the Rav examining the lungs and he says, "Oh yeah, this is fine," and then you go and compare it to something else, because that's a very, very nuanced area of law. You can't make that comparison. But if you're talking about Shabbos candles, where clearly he's lighting Shabbos candles, but how else are you going to interpret this action on Erev Shabbat? He's taking a wick and tying it around the nutshell and lighting candles. Right? So there, it's much more easy to discern. The reason that we're discussing this is because the theme that Rav Kook brings out in Os Kuf is the idea of what he calls chikui, mimicking or copying, which is a very, very deep, I would say psychological, but it's even deeper than psychological, because it's a primal tendency in human development, the idea of copying or imitating. And if we think about it, how much of our development, how much of the stability of all the systems and interactions that we have are based on imitation. Right? When someone builds, for example, a franchise, So what are they building? Right, the guy who I hate to use like such a common example, but if you build a restaurant franchise, so what have you built? You haven't built every single store that is now in the world. What did you build? You built a system, right? And then all of the places in the world copy that system. It's just a copy. It's just a copy of that thing. Yeah, it's like the gauge for the railways in the world. Every rail track in the world, it's called a gauge. So the distance between the distance between the track and the thickness of the track itself. It's called a gauge. Yeah, it's the same all over the world.
Right.
Why is it the same? Because what?
Works.
It works, and why? It's rooted historically. You can actually see evidence of this here in this country. Why is it? Because that was the width. I believe it's eight. It's eight and something feet. It's like a very, very specific
And the back
8 feet and like a few inches. I believe that's what it is. Why is that? Because when the Romans built roads to interconnect the European Empire, that was the measurement because that's the most stable, like that's the perfect stability for, a carriage carrying a lot of stuff. And it's also conservative in terms of space, meaning it can turn corners. Like it's not too wide that it can't turn corners, but it's not too narrow that's going to fall over. It's based on that. And an interesting fact, which is very relevant to this conversation, as we're going to see. One of the things that the Soviets did is that because they had such an abhorrence for how everyone else did everything, because they're like the new version of stuff. We do everything better by definition. What? Right. It was a trend. This is important to know. This is a good thing to know in general. There's a phenomenon called Lysenkoism, named after the guy who was the head of the Ministry of Agriculture in the time of Stalin, Lysenko, a guy named Lysenko, and he invented an idea that if it's the doctrine that's produced out of this system has to be better than other things, like scientifically, it has to be better. Of course, he killed millions of people with his great ideas, right? No, I mean not like physically, not like shot people. His ideas were so horrible, people starved to death because he was right. You don't want the Ministry of Agriculture basing his ideas on right. So this was that idea. It was a natural, organic, product of that system. That what we do has to be better than everything else. So they changed that. They changed the gauge of the rail cars. What's the problem? Nothing can get out of Russia to other countries, and nothing can come from other countries into Russia because the gauge was different. Yeah. So everything that we do, so much of what we do is just copying what works. Like we say, don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of wisdom to that because if something works, all you need to do is orient yourself to the thing that already works. And then you'll work also.
But at the same time, you have to improve.
What?
At the same time, you have to improve.
At the same time, you have to improve. So what Rav Kook is going to teach us is about chikoi de kedusha, mimicking in holiness, and mimicking in the tzad hara that he calls it, right? The evil side of imitation. Right? What are the characteristics of positive imitation, and what are the characteristics of negative imitation? We see that there is a halachic concept called ma'aseh rav, which is just a nice way of saying what you see, do that. If you see the Rav doing something, you should do that. And thinking, oh, well, that clearly must be, I'll just apply it. But you don't really know what's going on. You don't know the circumstances, you don't know the theory behind it. So you don't have enough information to really conduct yourself in that way. This is really the basis for the whole discussion over here. So with that introduction, we'll jump into Oskov. With the multitude of existence, which is full of its richness and its various powers, Rabbi, the influx of life or the outflux of life goes and intellectual chafetzit in desires, mautit in its essentialness, which is toladati. It is generational. Generational, not only in the sense of generations like father to son to grandchild, but generational in the sense that it generates. There is a light of generating capacity. Shemavhik mimenu kidemut noghot hashpayot. That it takes form of the outpouring of light, can give forth influence. Shemakor hachinuch, which becomes the source of all education, the source of all education. You see where he's going with this? That imitation is the most basic form of education. Meaning you want someone to be able to do something, you show them how to do it. It's like I was just in Badachad, right? The army base at, down south by Mitzpeh Ramon, by Ovadia's territory, which is where where all the officers in the Israeli army are trained. They have to go through there at least for like a 4-month course. Some stay longer. And the Sisma, not logo, not code. Oh my gosh,
Sign.
like the saying, their motto, right? Atintiru v'chein ta'asu. You'll watch me do it, and it's plastered all over the base, right? Atintiru v'chein ta'asu. Yeah. Amorsheh, which is something that is given over, right? It's like you say in the legal context that someone is a morsheh, someone's being given over the authority or the power to do something, right? That the basis of that is because he's able to mimic the original power holder of that thing. One era to another. Ha'olamit novat misham. It all, the ability to copy. Hanetiyah shel ha'ityatzvut b'tor ha'ma'amad ha'musag. This is a difficult sentence. Hanetiyah, the tendency, ha'ityatzvut b'tor ha'ma'amad, of standing in a position of hamusag mima lahagvul hamugbal, which is, it extends beyond the limited capacity shel hayesh hamafurat hane'erach ba'archav hamiyuchadim, beyond the constrained capacities of the individual as it exists by itself. I believe that this is just a long, it's a slightly long-winded way of saying that if there's an individual, that even if the individual is completely the other to the next stage, to the next generation, about how to do the same thing. So this capacity of the chikui, the kuf, is that. Why is this contained in kuf? Let's just finish the idea. Why is this contained in kuf? Hakof mechakehu et ha'adam. Because kof, the monkey, symbolically, is the imitator of man. First of all, in its very being, the primate is the imitator of man, meaning it has, like, on the surface, it basically looks like a man. There's superficially, it's like a human being, and the fact that from the sociologist to the anthropologist to the psychologist, they all learn things from how primates conduct themselves. They try to make these comparisons between how chimpanzee societies conduct themselves, how gorilla societies conduct themselves. It's not completely. It's not all garbage, right? I mean, that's taken right a further step to say that fundamentally there's a difference between a human being and primates, but that's a different story. Saying to see, right, the emergence of society, the emergence of family dynamics in these animals, it's not stam. The kof, who mechakeh ta'adam. It mimics man, right? So the kof, is the power of mimicking, copying, seeing something and being able to copy paste it, as we would say.
Is there an element of teaching students how to creatively handle a different situation that you can't tell them every eventuality that's going to happen? You have to teach them something that
the creativity. So he doesn't touch so directly on integrating creativity as such, but he does make a distinction between good mimicking and bad mimicking. So we'll see what that distinction is in a minute. Right? Kufism, exactly. Does he use that particular word? No, but that's a good one, and you should trademark that now so that we can use that. Huh? Okay. Well, we missed the boat on that one. Okay. Hakofit ha'enoshit hi hitstalmut hachikui hachoderet b'chol hashtachim. It is the capacity of chikui which penetrates all of the different areas. Hapoel b'chol hashderot lefi arkehem, that acts and conducts itself in all the different, let's say, areas, right? Lefi arkehem, according to their rules, according to their systems. Hachikui hatov, what is the positive mimicking? Hamishachlel et hayeshut, this allows the yeshut, all of existence, to become more developed. Who makor think, the source of all honor and all splendor is the ability to copy someone else, right? Watch me and conduct yourself in that way. Do exactly what I'm doing. I'm showing you how to do it. So do that. Right? That is the foundation of everything.
So are we both?
Both. That's a good question. It's clearly the interaction that he's talking about. He's talking about the teacher giving over in that way, right, of showing, right? It's like what we read in the Gemara. The teacher is he's not supposed to say this is the halacha in some flippant, ethereal way. He's supposed to say this is the halacha l'maisa. This is what you should do. Do X, Y, and Z, right? Do X, Y, and Z.
It's a principle of surgical teaching.
The modern medical school version of that pasuk in Shoftim that we said. Oh, that's
It's best way to absorb something you're saying. It's
right. Hama'aleh kol shefel al room. Right. It allows all lowly forms to rise up. So what does that mean? It means someone who is completely incompetent could come and stand before a master, and even the completely incompetent individual has the ability to copy someone else's motions. Even if you don't know anything, you can at least watch someone else and do what they do. So it's an incredible tool. Yeah. And this is what we talk about, proper, right, good, positive minhagim. We'll get. I want to make a small comment about that in a second. What we call positive minhagim. Tendencies to be uplifted. The idea of the machon haminhagim tovim. This is the center of positive minhagim. In halacha, we have a concept called minhagim. There is an area of halacha called minhagim. It's a halachic concept. People throw around this idea without often realizing that it actually has a definition. People say, "Oh, this is my definition." And in fact, there's a whole parak in the Gemara that is dedicated just to this concept. Right? And what is it called? Makam shenagu, the place where they are noeg this thing. It's right there in the name. Yeah, it's a parak in the Gemara in Pesachim, Mishnah in Pesachim, and the Gemara elaborates on the definitions of these things. I'll sum it up for you in a nutshell. Right, a minhag means that there is a geographical location in which there is a Jewish community that they have a certain practice. That's what it means.
How long?
What?
How long?
Even if they just decided 5 minutes ago. Yes. If everyone decides. I mean, it can be generated by different things. It can either the recognized Mora Hora, the Mora da Asra, gives a ruling that this is how things should be done here. That's one way of generating. If a person visits such a place, they're obligated to conduct themselves in that way as long as they're there. And a person's going away for a week to some Jewish community where they don't eat a certain thing, or they don't do malacha after a certain time, or they have this prohibition or that prohibition, you're obligated halachically to conduct yourself in that way as long as you're there. Once you leave, you don't have to do it anymore.
Are you obligated to search out what the minhagim of the place are?
That's a very good question. There's a Yerushalmi in Brachos. I never thought about that question, but now that you're asking it, I'll tell you. There's a Yerushalmi in Brachos that says, it tells a story about a certain Chacham in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yeshua something, I forget. It's not the Rabbi Yeshua of the Tanaim. It's the Rabbi Yeshua later in history in the time of the Amoraim. That he went to go and be Menachem Aval in another city, not where he lived. And the context over there is talking about there are certain places where they would say shalom to the Evel, that they would greet the Evel, and certain times they wouldn't say shalom. They would just sit in silence. Minhag, right? Some have this minhag and that minhag. The minhag of most kilos in the Jewish people today is to not say shalom. But back then there was a discrepancy in the minhagim. So Rabbi Yeshua came to the sure, if it's known to you, you shouldn't. Right? I'm saying that the halacha, but not lamaisa, because I have as the Gemara over there in Pesachim uses this terminology many times in other places, but primarily over there in the Gemara in Pesachim. It says, right, minhag avosechem biyadechem. The conduct of your fathers is in your hands, meaning you saw how your fathers conducted themselves, so that's what you do, right? You grew up in your parents' homes, you saw them doing what they're doing, so that's what you do. Minhag avosechem biyadechem. So hakofiyut hara. So now we're going to the negative form of the kof. Hi harisa shel hachikui. It is the dysfunctional or destroyed version of mimicking. She'ino lefi hatochen, because it mimics, but not according to the essential content. Ha'inyan v'hakavana yotzeret. The inyan, the essential concept. V'hakavana yotzeret, and the intended ideal contained within the action. Right. This is what the Gemara was saying about the Ma'aseh. Even if you see your teacher acting a certain way, don't just go do that because you don't know really what he's doing. Yeah, which comes to ruin the perfect justice. Hatzirim v'hanosi v'hashtifot, and the aspirations kinachal shotev holchim hemu mitgabrim. They all come with. They all are able to infuse So now taking this idea, he took a detour just, and it's not just this mechanical chikui of I'm watching you do it so I can repeat your movements, because competitive capacity has a psychological, emotional, and spiritual imprint on the person. That I think we quoted this before in a different context, but it's worth bringing again. The Rabbi Nissim, lived in Spain about 750 years ago, so and one of his drushos, I believe it's drusha A, he says a very powerful idea. He says, what is this? What is the underlying? So he says, what that means is that if a person has a powerful experience, it leaves an imprint on the body. And because it has an imprint on the body, he gives it over to the next. Today, there's an area of science called epigenetics. I'm sure the doctor can confirm that this is true. This is all about that. About how experience that you have after you're born. People used to think that the genetics are decided at the moment of birth. You can't change them. Once the person you're born, that's it. But no, that's not true. We know that after birth there could be experiences that change the genetic makeup of a person. One of the first this is a point, but one of the first studies of endurance, all the things you imagine that could help someone survive such a situation, right in the cabinet, so to speak, and imprint on the soul. In Torah's Moshe, you will repeat the lyrics. It's casting an imprint on the psyche flows out the repetitiveness. It comes the kofiyut, the imitation that brings down. It doesn't seek al shitchiyuta, and it doesn't care for its own superficiality. Shitchiyuta. I think it's one of the words that Rav Kook helped us coin in modern English. Right? Just following the rote of the superficial action. It doesn't seek to the depths of the soul. The monkey is inner recesses, Makor Kodesh HaKodashim, which is the source of all. Right, it's the inner sanctum. Meaning the inner sanctum is hugely about the form. The form of the bottom part is a little bit shorter, but it more or less looks like a cuff. And then we've seen that fundamental structures. There seems to be several fundamental structures. We have the Vav, we have the Yud structure that appears in many letters. It appears in the Mem, it appears in the Pei, and now it appears again in the Kaf. So they're necessary to do like a very, very fine move with your hand.